We'll now call this regular council meeting Monday, January 13th, 2025 to order at 5 p.m. First off, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples and the Splatseen of the Secwepemc Nation. And just before jumping into more business, I just wanted to say that a longtime citizen of Armstrong, Marion Hope, the 2005 Citizen of the Year, passed away on December 22nd. Marion came to Armstrong in 1943 as Miss Pickering and taught at the Armstrong Elementary School, where she taught for many years. She was also a founding member of the Armstrong Spell Machine Museum and Art Society. She worked at the IP office for years and was a member of the Centennial History Book Committee. So somebody that had a lot of dedication to our community. And with that, we'll move into our business. Looking for an adoption of the agenda, that the January 13th, 2025 agenda for the regular council meeting be adopted as amended by adding item 6.5, the 2025 fleet replacements. Do we have a mover? Councillor Todd, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Drapla, thank you. And next, adoption of the minutes, that the December 16th, 2024 minutes of the City of Armstrong regular council meeting be adopted. Mover, Councillor Drapla. Seconder, Councillor Wayner. All those in favor? And this will be carried. Thank you. And we'll start off our meeting tonight with a presentation regarding the intersections and our intersection work at Pleasant Valley, Rosedale, and Okanagan streets. We have in attendance with us tonight Peter Trutch, our traffic engineer, or the traffic engineer, and a representation from Interior Health, including online with Dr. Deli Pizzi and Cheyenne Baines and Janelle Rimmel. So the floor is yours, please, for your presentation.
Well, thank you, Councillor. I'm just checking that you can hear me okay. Okay, so thanks so much for this opportunity to present to Mayor and Council. My name is Andy Delapizzi. I'm a medical health officer with Interior Health, and I work closely with Dr. Jonathan Mallow, who's the medical health officer for the geographic region City of Armstrong, who's unable to attend today. And as you mentioned, we're working closely on this project with Cheyenne, Janelle, and Peter. So I'll just go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm calling in from Kamloops, which is the traditional unceded and ancestral territories of the Kamloops Teshwepum. And Interior Health, we like to recognize and acknowledge the traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Dakel-Dene, Tunaha, Inglapkama, Shewepum, Statlium, Selks, and Silcotin nations, where we live, learn, collaborate, and work together. Go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah. So in Interior Health, in the population and public health teams, we really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with local governments. We think it's so important that working on these upstream determinants of health, the conditions in which we live and work, and also our communities and infrastructure to protect health of communities and populations. So the key is collaboration. It's working closely with cities. Under the Public Health Act in British Columbia, we have a duty to advise local governments on matters of protecting health. So we, again, really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate. And this Vision Zero project with under the province and injury prevention teams is very important work. So we're really appreciative of the opportunity to collaborate. And we'll go to the next slide. So it's really important to look at the burden of injuries and deaths from motor vehicle crashes. And, in general, we can look at the burden, the health impacts in a number of ways. We look at the important outcomes such as deaths. We look at hospitalizations. We can also look at things like injuries and impact on quality of life. We can sometimes also look at the economic costs of the injuries. So looking at the direct costs of healthcare to address the injuries, and also the indirect costs, the pain and suffering that people go through sometimes for a long time in their life, and also the loss of productivity and things like that. So we've put together some snapshots of some of the impacts on health, and I'd like to present some of that to Council. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is from the BC CDC mortality dashboard. And what we mean to communicate with the charts on the left is that, accidents are very important causes of death in British Columbia, especially for younger British Columbians. So you can see that in the age group 10 to 18, accidents are the third leading cause of death. And in the age group 19 to 39, accidents are the second leading cause of death. The yellow bar is the toxic drug crisis, deaths that are attributed to the toxic drug crisis. Accidents encompass, unintentional injuries, so things like drownings and falls, and also transport-related deaths. So it kind of intermingles many causes of death, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of motor vehicle crashes. The data on the right is important. And so every year, this is from the BC Coroners. This is Coroners data that in 2023, we lost 331 British Columbians in motor vehicle crashes. About 133 were in the Interior Health Authority, including 30 in the Okanagan Health Service Delivery area. So, those deaths are not distributed equally in the province. Interior Health and Northern Health in general have higher rates per capita than the rest of the province. And even within Interior Health, the deaths are not distributed equally. The Okanagan Health Service Delivery area, for example, is lower than, I'll just pull up I've got the data here internally, just give me 1 second. But the Okanagan Health Service Delivery area deaths per capita are lower than East Kootenay Boundary, or the Thompson Caribou Shuswap deaths. So we have lots of work to do in Interior Health. We have lots of work to do in the province, and we have work to do in the Okanagan Health Service Delivery area as well to reduce the impact of motor vehicle crashes and causing deaths. Importantly, a high proportion of deaths are in people who are not in vehicles, pedestrians or cyclists. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is a busy slide, but it includes data from the province and from Interior Health Authority and Armstrong. And so the lower section involves hospitalizations, the leading causes of injury hospitalizations in BC for a year. And you can see on the side, I think you're just covering a little bit of the all ages box, but for all ages, transport, thank you, transport incidents are the second leading cause of injury hospitalizations in the province. Again, here's some of the data that relates to the cost. Like, Interior Health had, over 650 traffic-related hospitalizations costing over $8 million. And a large proportion of those hospitalizations were in the Okanagan. Armstrong itself, from ICBC data that's publicly available, had 10 casualty crashes. So this includes deaths and injuries. And I think that's in 2019. But all this to say that there is a large burden, that's 2023, thank you. So there's a large burden of health impacts from motor vehicle crashes, including deaths and hospitalizations. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, and this slide is communicating the absolute numbers of hospitalizations for about a 20-year period and how it's changed over time for people inside motor vehicles and people walking and people cycling. So important to know that people walking and cycling are not having the same reduction in hospitalizations that people inside motor vehicles have. So when we think about equity, providing resources to where they're needed most. We know that motor vehicles can be costly. Many people rely on walking or cycling. So having protections and considering protections in our cities and communities that protect people walking and cycling is an equitable measure. It's providing resources for those who need it the most. So there's an importance to reduce the number of hospitalizations and injuries for those inside motor vehicles and those who are outside of vehicles as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And this slide is, communicating the importance of protecting those active users, people who walk, people who bike along the side of roads. There have been many engineering improvements to motor vehicles, which are important and they are very helpful, but those same protections are not necessarily applied to people who are walking or cycling. And I think this slide communicates that. So we'll go to the next slide. So how do we prevent injuries and deaths on the road for all users? We can go to the next slide. So when we consider the different interventions to protect people using roadways, some are more effective than others. And so there's a hierarchy of effectiveness, and it communicates that some measures to protect people who use roads are much more effective than others. This is really drawn from workplace health and safety guidance. We know that it's very important that when people go to work, that their workplaces are safe. So there are established legislations and protections for people in workplaces. And we know that engineering the workplaces to eliminate hazards, to eliminate risks, are much better than things like education or having policies in place to try to protect people. So those engineering mechanisms to change the structure of the workplace are most protective. And this is trying to communicate the same thing for our roadways. So trying to engineer roadways to be safer are those efforts are much more effective than other efforts like educating or encouraging people for roadway safety. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this slide is really important, and the most important thing here is that speed is speed is the most important contributing factor to road injuries. The higher the speed, the greater the stopping distance required, the greater the chance of a crash, and the higher risks of injuries if a crash occurs. So speed modifies road injuries in many different ways. And it really is physics. You know, the kinetic energy is proportional to the velocity squared. So as the velocity increases a little bit, the energy transferred in any crash will increase a lot. And what this curve called the Romberg curve tries to communicate, and this, for instance, might be a pedestrian who is in a crash with a vehicle impact speed that the difference between 30 kilometers per hour and 50 kilometers per hour is great. So this is the probability of a serious injury as speed increases. So we might say that at 30 kilometers per hour, most people don't have a serious injury, but at 50 kilometers per hour, most people will have a serious injury. So there's little wiggle room. And the lowering speed is one of the most protective measures, or the most protective measure that we can have to try to minimize harms from motor vehicle crashes. The information on the left is from the Vision Zero documentation, and it's trying to pick these thresholds. So we know that you know, if there's a risk of a head-on collision, we should keep speeds below 70 kilometers per hour. If there's a risk of a pedestrian collision, we should do our best to keep our speeds below 30 kilometers per hour to try to minimize harms. And it's trying to kind of extrapolate the data from that idea that speed hurts. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so improving the health of the population through road safety. And I think I'll go to the next slide. Yes, so you know, and Peter and the team that worked on the changes in the city of Armstrong communicated to our team that, you know, that the most important changes here are that the changes slow vehicle speeds and they shorten crossing distances for people, for pedestrians or cyclists using the intersection as well. So slowing vehicle speeds, calming traffic can be very, very helpful. Shortening crossing distances decreases the time at risk for people involved in the intersection. So both these measures from a public health lens are very valuable at protecting people. We'll go to the next slide. And you know, the most important measure, the engineering changes at these two intersections are really trying to prevent injuries from crashes. But when you start to consider other things, like if you consider co-benefits and things like perhaps City of Armstrong is moving towards an active transportation policy and dedicating more space for people to walk and cycle, we start to see many co-benefits from policies like this. So the primary aim is to reduce injuries, but we also see that if we get more people safely using roadways in community, we can encourage physical activity, we can reduce transport-related pollution, improving air quality. We know that physical activity enhances mental health. We know that it's an equitable measure to protect people who are using more accessible means of transportation. It promotes heart health and it reduces noise pollution as well. So there are many co-benefits to policies such as that the City of Armstrong is considering. So I think I'll hand it over to Peter Trush now for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
See, there we go. Okay, now it should be audible. All right. So I'm going to do my best to try and attempt to quantify for these particular intersections a little bit about what Dr. Delapizzi was talking about here. Next slide, please. I'll first give a little bit of background about why these intersections were selected to start with. Previous to Armstrong being awarded the IH grant for road safety, the city had undertaken the road safety study by Watt, completed in June 2023. And within that, the top 5 injury collision locations were identified. And we were able to tackle 2 of those through the work that's being done on downtown with Pleasant Valley. And then my report tackled the other 3 of the top 5. Of those top 5, the 2 on Rosedale were selected with benefits to doing some work that was already being done at one of the locations at Okanagan. And so we were able to take take those 2 and actually proceed forward with the grant and apply it to those 2 locations. We've talked a little bit about Vision Zero, and it's been mentioned tonight, but what I wanted to specifically mention is that the purpose of Vision Zero is to eliminate all casualty collisions. So that's injury and fatality. Okay? And so I guess, in a very brief nutshell, to summarize all of the information that Dr. Delapizzi just presented to you all here, that's why health authorities are involved, and that's why the grant applications are coming through. We're really trying to improve overall population health for everybody. Next slide, please. So as an engineer, these are some of the things that we face. And, I'm quoting, this is from the Armstrong Bitch and Boast page. It was taken from the last 8 months. And each one of those particular things are clips that I pulled off of there. So the one on the left there is actually reminding folks to properly use a 4-way stop. So these are members of the public that are actually posting this. The context of that was I'm observing lots of people that aren't observing the rules of the road at 4-way stops. The one on the right, more recently with, a picture that was captured in December here. And you can see what we're trying to see here is that the vehicle has actually run onto the sidewalk slightly in the snow and back around taking that corner. And of course, the one in the middle there, a full-on text complaining that, as a pedestrian, I was nearly run over today. So we understand that even in Armstrong, the context is there. The things that we're really trying to do from an engineering perspective on all of this is to minimize the amount of times where you would, and minimize the amount of risk that you have somebody run off the road or have somebody do a dangerous maneuver that might endanger somebody, but at the same time also recognize that, we're all human as drivers and we do tend to err sometimes. And thus we need to make sure that the designs are also somewhat generous in that sense as well. So it's a bit of a catch-22. We're almost trying to take it from both sides and find something that's in the middle. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to acknowledge a few of the frequently asked questions that I've seen floating around in the public. Okay. One of them that starts with me is who is the idiot engineer that designed this? Well, that's me. I'm here, so happy to take questions later. But there was a question that floating around, well, this seems so complicated. Why can't we just put flashing lights up? Well, number one, there are flashing lights already for pedestrians at the Pleasant Valley Road intersection. And then for Rosedale and Okanagan, it's actually against national and provincial guidelines to install those types of devices at 4-way stops. And so we have to look at different engineering measures instead of flashing lights. Why not speed bumps or speed humps as traffic calming measures? Well, absolutely, those are great measures and they work well. Those particular ones were outside of the grant budget and aren't also great at intersections. Okay, they're a bit more effective on linear stretches as people are driving. Okay, they can be effective at intersections, and I would encourage you as a raised intersection to consider that at some point. But like I said, you know, this was a small grant application, so we're trying to maximize the amount of budget that we can with that. Okay, and well, why didn't you consider other locations? Well, as I explained earlier, you know, we dealt with the top 5 that came from the report in 2023. I also wanted, on the next slide, please, also wanted to acknowledge some public perceptions that are floating out there as well and try and address them specifically. So the first one being that roads have to accommodate all drivers of all vehicles. Well, that's true and not true at the same time. Okay, no local residential street or collector road is generally designed to accommodate semi-turning movements within the roadway space. Okay. There's a recognition that those really large vehicles will make use of the full road space that's there, or they might run a curb on occasion. Okay. The key with this is that remembering that 98% of the traffic that's using these 2 intersections, okay, and particularly for turning movements, are just regular passenger cars. So that's cars, minivans, you know, pickup trucks, that sort of type of traffic. That being said, Pleasant Valley obviously accommodates semis going through. You know, we recognize that's a wider route or a truck route, and that's frequently used. And so wider lanes are taken into account there as part of these designs. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you know, and we also jumped ahead a little bit with these 2 intersections, recognizing that Armstrong is likely going to be undertaking a truck route study this year in 2025. And so we'll be looking at, the city will be looking at the context of this overall and making sure that you know, heavy vehicles aren't using residential roadways like Rosedale Avenue. Pickup trucks with trailers can't make the corner is another public perception. Well, I would have to say that the way that the design is done for both locations, the stop bars are set back a little bit from the intersection to allow for left turns. And for right turns, while it is tight, and I acknowledge it's tight, and it's intentionally tight, the right turns where the placement of the bollards are allow for larger vehicles with trailers to make right turns. Slide, please. Okay, another perception that I've seen floating around is that emergency vehicles like fire trucks in particular can't make it through these intersections. Again, I would respond back and say that the design does accommodate all these types of vehicles. Okay, we know that there's one corner that is a little bit tight for the largest fire truck that Armstrong has. However, that being said, again, the setback of the bollards allows for that vehicle to maneuver safely through the intersection. Of course, the big caveat to all of this is that when it's an emergency situation and they're on call, lights and sirens are flashing, really, they have right of way and a vehicle can do whatever they need to do to get through the intersection. So if you're really, really stuck, you can actually drive up onto the curb, make use of other space to try and get around. Okay, I've heard comments that buses can't make it through the intersection. And to a certain extent, this is a little bit true, okay, in the sense that we have designed any turning movement that we know that buses use to allow for buses to use that turning movement. There are a couple of turning movements, though, that a large bus in particular, would have to give way, wait until the intersection is clear, and then make use of a bit more of the pavement around the intersection to be able to make their turn. Slide. We've heard some comments about that these intersections are difficult to navigate for me as an impaired person, and I would argue that as a wheelchair user, they're actually a little bit more convenient now. The wheelchair landings that have been created on the street surface can now allow for someone who's in a wheelchair to position themselves to be able to directly cross the crosswalk. That's given that space outside of the curb, but off the sidewalk in order to be able to maneuver and negotiate. We do definitely acknowledge, though, that for someone with visual impairments, there are a couple of elements that do need to be added, and we've actually spoken to members of the public about this already. There's a fallacy around that narrow lanes will increase collisions. And I call that a fallacy in this context. It actually is true in certain regards. At highway speeds, you do want wider lanes. Wider lanes are a known and proven safety measure to allow for error at high speeds and a little bit more gap and space. In cities, though, and in most built-up areas, narrower lanes are actually proven to be safer. Okay, and this hasn't been the traditional thinking for a long time. A lot of time, and a lot of our communities in the last 50 years have developed using highway standards. Okay? And over that time, there's been a lot of research that's now proven that highway lane widths are actually less safe in cities. So I would add that Armstrong has been largely designed to those standards. And so the practice now is to actually try and narrow those lanes back up. It was a mistake on the part of as we've been developing your communities. Okay, and finally, tight corners will increase collisions, particularly in winter. We do definitely have not had much experience yet with the winter conditions here. And so I would absolutely love to continue to see the pilot continue so that we can garner that data. But I will pull it back and say that in principle, okay, the corners are designed such to reduce the speeds, as Dr. Delapizzi mentioned. Okay, and with that, you get better traction and slower speeds. And so there should be a lot less risk in slipping and sliding into other locations. The radius or the corner radii that were designed on each one of these intersections actually meet the Armstrong bylaw. And so I would argue that if somebody's saying, well, they're way, way too tight, no, they're actually the same radius that's used everywhere else in town. They're just a little bit closer in to where they're typically positioned to what drivers are used to. And ultimately, the corners, as I mentioned, there is leeway between the paint lines on the right turn corners and the bollards. And again, that's to give a little bit of that safety factor that we talked about for trying to guide drivers into doing the best maneuver, but giving them a little bit of leeway in case they're not quite able to make it. Final one that I've seen floating around is that this is a done deal. It's not. It's a one-year pilot project. It's being continually monitored over the year. And as I mentioned, I think having that good understanding of winter conditions is also important. And so I would encourage council to continue on with this pilot. Let us finish evaluating all of the context of this, and we will continue to make slight tweaks and changes for a possible permanent design at the end. So in conclusion, I'll leave this on this next slide here for questions. Okay. The key to this, again, is we're designing the system for vision 0. It's not vision 2, it's not vision 5. We had historical records of collisions that were there that resulted in injuries. Okay. And while I recognize that it is a little bit controversial and that there certainly are members of the public that view this as unnecessary, it's my duty to care, or duty to society as an engineer, to be able to provide the best technical guidance to try and result in 0 injury at the end of the day. So as I mentioned, I'll be happy to take questions, and we know Dr. Delapizzi is also on the line to take advantage of that as well. Answer any questions from health perspective.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Councillor Valstar.
Is there any issue with widening the southeast corner on Rosedale and Okanagan and Rosedale, Pleasant Valley Southwest?
Back on here. Okay, southeast Okanagan. So let's
Bottom left.
Can we point that out on the screen here, actually?
Yeah.
Is it on here?
Left image, bottom left.
Yeah. Okay, and
On the right image, bottom right.
yeah, bottom.
I'm pointing out those two corners because I understand that I understand the value in what we're trying to achieve. I do, I definitely see the value in it, but like the community has made it very loud and clear that this is not something that they're super excited about. So it's our job as counselors to try to, try to make our best decisions. My my feeling in my heart is telling me that this is not all bad and that it shouldn't be just gone. What I would like to see done is compromise. I know it's a pilot project, but I just don't see the value in not attempting a compromise. So I'm just asking, I threw out a number beforehand and I'll throw out a number again. Those two corners, would we be able to achieve a vision zero type thing with like a tractor tire width bigger, 20 inches?
Through the chair, your worship, it's interesting that you pick on those two corners in particular, because those two are the ones that I've been, well, two of the three that I've been monitoring the closest. Obviously, the one at Pleasant Valley in Rosedale was a super wide corner previously, right? Everybody was basically taking that at almost full speed. So narrowing that up, and in both of those two particular situations, you're talking about an angle that's maybe not quite a full 90, might be a little less or a little more, depending on the circumstance that you're taking. And so if you're talking about, slight differences more, yeah, I think that probably is in the cards, okay, for a permanent solution. If you're talking compromise. Now, if we're talking, massive amounts of change, I would say that you lose all of the benefit of what we're trying to achieve here. And thus I wouldn't recommend that, but I would certainly say that, that tweaks and changes through that would be things that we would be considering at the end with the final recommendations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not, yeah, I understand that these are quite the topic in our community, and for us to leave it as it stands and just pretend that we don't hear everyone is not acceptable. I think that finding a compromise is the way forward. And I'm picking on those two corners because I can see that both of those corners, we could push it back a couple of feet. And I think that would be something that we could go forward. I remember that we put a resolution forward in November asking for those particular corners to be looked at and evaluated. And every meeting since I've brought it up, and at the last meeting before we heard that you guys were coming, we heard that an engineer came out and looked at it and said that the standard is the standard and that's it. So having it, the standard is the standard, and calling it that is, I don't know. I'm not saying that you did that. I'm not saying who said that, but what I'm saying is that if that's the way that we're dealing with our community, like we got to go grocery shopping every week. We got to look all these people in the eye. We got to do something about this. And that's my recommendation.
Absolutely. Your worship, can I respond back to that briefly? Thank you. Yeah, I was out in the late fall, okay? And I will be honest, I didn't see any issues with how it was working at this point in time. And now I was only out there for a snippet of time, so it, take that with, with an asterisk in there. Okay. Why I say I didn't see that there were major issues with it is that the bollards on those two corners are set back far enough that there's actually quite a bit of grace for the 98% of vehicles that are traversing those corners, okay, which are the regular passenger cars. And in the case of Pleasant Valley, we were actually already starting to see higher speeds as a result. They weren't following the white fog line, but they were crossing over that and quote unquote cutting the corner, making use of the space that was designed more for larger vehicles. Again, when you consider the Vision Zero principles in there, the reason is that we want vehicles to be turning the corners a little bit slower. As a resident and as a driver, I completely recognize it's a change. It's a bit different, but you know, when you put on that safety lens back to the Vision Zero side of things, trying to reduce collisions, we have to make sure that speeds are not excessive going around the corners. So certainly happy to continue to look at it, monitor it. Okay. My guiding light, my vision, my premise on this is that we don't want to make any changes to this that completely nullify the objective of this. Okay. And that's making sure that everybody's taking the intersection with a little bit more care, a little bit more caution, and a little bit slower.
Hi, thank you for being here. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to Interior Health for the opportunity to apply for a grant to make our community safer. I've been around here long enough that I was here when we had citizens coming to the table questioning why we weren't doing something about safety in Armstrong. And mostly they were focused on the pedestrian traffic. I totally understand by making the intersections more of a square that helps with the pedestrian traffic. I've never had a problem with that. Right from the get-go, the first meeting we had a chance to discuss this, my concerns were those two right-hand corners that Councillor Valstar brought up. I don't think that at any time I was asking for anything to go back to the way it was. I was just asking for a little bit of leniency, especially during the winter. I have a son who actually, when he had his license first in high school, went around that corner and ended up across the street in the fence. So we understand that going too fast for the road conditions causes a problem. So I was a little concerned about that, especially in the winter to do the trial section then. I'm wondering if the concerns have come from the fact that it's been a big change all at once, for one. The one on Pleasant Valley and Rosedale, coming off of Pleasant Valley on that corner that's on a bit of a slope, and concerned with the snow, and as it piles up, it melting, and that makes that corner icy when there may not be another corner in Armstrong that's icy. To me, that was adding to that problem. But I'm wondering if the biggest concerns are coming from the fact that we're doing a one-year test section, and we started it right before the winter came. Well, I guess it hasn't come yet, until winter was supposed to come. And the problem that I see is that the final plan for those intersections isn't what we see right now. The way I understand it, when the bollards are gone, which are causing the angst for people, those bollards for sure, when they're gone, is it not so that we will be evaluating the test trial period and seeing how we can have those corners? There will be some kind of curbing, maybe a raised edge there that will help guide trucks that are going a little bit wider or need to go wider, like they do on a roundabout where you have that little leeway. I don't know. I'm just presuming. Maybe there will be a little triangle in the middle like there used to be, like going back to the future. I don't know. But I think this is what's causing the angst, is that people see those bollards. They're not used to them. They are used to driving faster than they should be. And one of the things, the main thing, was pedestrian safety. That's great. On those two right corners right now, there are no crosswalks. So to me, by moving those two corners back a little bit, which would include the stop sign that is in a really good place for pedestrian traffic, but maybe during this tech session, it could be just back a little bit. Putting that back a little bit and continuing on with our project to make the streets safer would be good. The two people specifically in town that were complaining about pedestrian traffic are the only two people that have called and written letters and said how proud they are that we listened. But earlier in this talk, I believe it was the fine doctor used the word collaboration. I think that there's a collaboration that we as councillors, as elected officials, we have to collaborate with the engineers, the professionals that tell us how things are supposed to be done, right? But we also get that collaboration with the people who elected us, who drive the roads every day, some of them who are the problem that we're trying to direct, but we're collaborating on both levels. And we have to obviously listen to the experts, but we also have to listen to our residents and try and figure out a way that with the proper standards and rules and regulations that we can make things safer and people can get used to it. But that's my concern, is that those two right-hand corners right from the get-go were such a big change, and they probably aren't going to be like that in the future. I've had a couple of people in the last 2 weeks. One said that they had to sit and watch or back up, which is fine because there was a moving ban. So my point with this is that there will be big trucks in our residential areas, whether we like them or not, and they're going to have to maneuver to get in there. We can't say that they're never going to be there. But to me, it seems like a bit of a risk when those big trucks do have to come into those intersections in a residential area, especially if people driving the cars that have to sit there and wait don't have the patience or the courtesy to let them go ahead like they do downtown with the big pellet plant trucks. People have a courtesy there because they don't want to tackle being underneath it. I had one other question, if I may. I just was wondering if we are all being educated in the safety of a intersection. We're all trying to find something that we can be satisfied with, everybody can be happy with. But there's often incidences where the school children aren't using any education that they've learned about traffic safety. So as much as the drivers are getting educated, politicians and the decision makers are getting educated, does Interior Health do any education in the school systems? I bring that up because one of the young men that got clipped on his backpack with a driver who just decided not to stop for him, he was crossing the sidewalk, but he hadn't punched the button to use the yellow light. So the yellow light is only as good as the people that are going to use it. That light is on and a car goes through there. There's absolutely no reason why they aren't clipped at the wings. But in the meantime, we don't want our kids clipped. And if they can be educated a little bit better about not walking down the middle of the roads, walking to the crosswalks, etc., I think it's better for everybody, drivers, medical people, the kids, and people's lives. So those are my concerns, but I'm happy to hear that without changing the fact that we want safer intersections, that maybe just a little bit of leniency would make those two right-hand corners easier to handle. The other truck that went through that will be on our, it was a big lumber delivery truck with a big crane on the back. Same thing, they're going to be on a residential streets as long as we're encouraging development in town. So there's going to be these trucks. We just don't want them there all the time. And they better be professional drivers if they're going to be navigating these corners. So yeah, it's not all bad to me. I'm happy that the pedestrians can be more satisfied and feel safer. I think that there's just maybe a little bit of tweaking to do, and we'll see that when the test is over, but I hope that we can come to some satisfactory conclusions in the meantime. And thank you for your time, and thank you for having the strength to come here and face us all.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. Your worship, I'm not quite sure if I'll comment on the education piece to a certain extent, and then I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Delapizzi a little bit about the IH perspective. I do know that school districts do run educational programs for kids. I can't comment, and I won't comment on behalf of SD22 here whether or not they've done education campaigns at the elementary school or the middle, like surrounding schools to this. There are other options if the school district is unwilling to or is unable to do that. ICBC does run additional training programs as well, and so I think that I think the city can potentially take the lead on some of those initiatives to try and address specifically with students. But I also don't want to comment on behalf of city staff for that one either.
Can I just quickly, Your Worship, add that we do have identified in the active transportation plan, looking at the safe routes to schools with the schools. And I imagine some of that would involve training and identifying the best way for kids to get there.
Peter, I'm just going to get you to stand up there for a few more minutes because there's 4 or 5 comments still to come, and then we'll move down to the doctor and hear what he has to say. You can pick up any points that we're missing. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Todd.
One other question about or comment about the moving truck situation. I just want to be clear that it wasn't interpreted that you never have those vehicles using local roads. Obviously, they do on occasion. My point was that they are a very small percentage of that. right? And when they do need to negotiate it, they take up more of the road space than staying quote unquote within the lane, right? So just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you, Your Worship.
I just want to, you've heard from everybody already, and I'm just going to reiterate that the fact that that one intersection on the southeast corner up top there, if we, whatever we can do to mitigate that turn is pull it back a bit. And once the bollards are gone, the sight of those won't annoy people anymore. And there'll be a rolling curb that people will probably roll up on, one's assuming that that's what the plan is. It's not going to be a hard 90-degree solid curb up there. One wouldn't think.
Through the chair, I don't want to speculate on the final design. You know, theoretically, that would probably be the context of where you would do it, is that you'd have a soft rollover curb, similar to what Councillor Fowler said about roundabout type rollovers, and then a harder curb further back.
Right. I think that's as long as you're hearing what we're saying and is everything that you can do to make that better than it is now. And I think if we'd done this before we did any of that work, we would have eliminated 90% of the hassle. But we did it now. So at least we've done it now and people will see it. And the people that hate it will still hate it no matter what. But I think the idea, nobody wants accidents. We're all 100% behind a zero vision, zero strategy. We understand the concept. But as Jeff said, we have to listen to the community as well. And the community's not happy. So whatever you can do to make our lives easier and their lives easier, that'd be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
I'm going to go on to Councillor Nietzsche now.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. I just want to thank Peter and Dr. Del Pizzi for their presentations. It's nice to hear the rationale for these changes based on professional opinion, and I certainly do take that professional opinion and advice to heart when it comes to making decisions. I think the first question I had has been answered regarding the potential for final design, and I was happy to hear Peter say that it's most likely, if it's were to stay exactly the same, there's most likely going to be some sort of rollover curb that would be installed there. No final design's been finalized yet, but I totally understand sort of what the rationale is moving forward. Peter, my question for you is, was a four-way stop intersection contemplated at the PV Rosedale intersection? And if it wasn't, why not? And just curious to hear your professional opinion on that.
Through the chair, it was not contemplated. I can tell you a couple of reasons why off the top, it wasn't one of my key recommendations. Number one, Pleasant Valley is a through route. It does have a number of heavy trucks, and it is on the slope. So forcing people to come to a complete stop at that location, in my mind, without doing a thorough analysis, but my gut would tell me that could actually potentially introduce more safety issues than solve. So I didn't consider it from that perspective. It also wasn't in the context of either of these particular projects to deal too much with changing traffic controls or city standards on a lot of different things as well. And so, you know, we sort of took what's there and just was working with what was there within the context of what was there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to comment quickly on the education piece from the school perspective. And so I know work is done with all the schools in town on traffic safety. And what I like about these two intersections in particular is just the importance to them in terms of our youth in town, specifically the one at Rosedale and Pleasant Valley, because there's students from all three schools, like levels of schools, using that intersection daily. But then also the intersection at Rosedale and Okanagan, because that is also one that the high school kids will drive through every lunch hour. And so I think no matter just the nature of children and adolescents, is that when they can sit in a classroom and talk about it and they can know what they're supposed to do. But as soon as you get out there with friends and thinking about multiple things and stuff kind of goes out of their head, right? Until you're teaching, until they kind of experience that in life a little bit and mature, I think, really. And so we noticed that we spend a lot of time at the high school, even just monitoring whether like them crossing the street and crossing the parking lot on their own as teenagers, where you think that they'd have that look both ways down, but as soon as the bell rings and they're with their buddies, they don't, right? They'll step right out in front of a bus and we'll be like, what are you doing? And then you can see that too when they're driving, racing to Tim Hortons or McDonald's for lunch so they don't have to wait in the long lineup. Like it's that speed on those corners is a big deal. I don't think those two, like we've heard the arguments for those two right-hand turns. And if it doesn't impact the overall safety of the intersection, like if we can give a little bit and still maintain the benefits, I'm all in for that too. But in terms of the youth in town and the decision making that they have with groups and at the timing of day, when they're using those in particular, I think those are two really important intersections for us to stay focused on in the community.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was really nice to see the like macro approach that the province worked down as far as the data went and how the risk filtered down into the town of city of Armstrong. And yeah, it just helped me kind of wrap my head around the risk. And I drive the intersections where those kids are walking every day. I've ran those roads for years, and I have to say that I've seen improvements. I humbly have to admit that I did take the corner on Pleasant Valley and Rosedale maybe a little faster than I should have in the winter times a few times, and forcing myself to slow down before I make that turn. I can see why those turns are helpful. I would agree that if we can relax some of them for the larger vehicles, given the pressures that I've seen some of the drivers face and the stresses that they're on when they're trying to navigate those corners, I think would be a benefit to those drivers on those two particular corners. For me, moving forward, just to feel comfortable with a final solution, I would really like to see the results of some kind of stakeholder discussions with the fire departments, the emergency services, and the ambulance emergency services and the school buses and any other stakeholders, just to make sure that we don't overlook something because we don't drive it. We're not the professional drivers that are navigating it, driving code 3, emergency response, and just those little pieces, that nuances that we don't think of. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Weiner. I too am really supportive of the changes to some extent in the intersections. Safety first. Nobody's going to argue that for a moment. And the shortening up the sidewalks is a great idea. I did have somebody, a truck driving company phoned me one day and we had this discussion. And when I pointed out that that was the goal of what we were trying to achieve it was the end of the topic. He said, I get it. What we are seeing is those right-hand turns. And the only thing that we really haven't addressed here today is implementation plan for change. So if it is acceptable, and we're hearing so many complaints and witnessing them as well, what kind of time frame might we be looking at for you to reevaluate this, try to add that 20 inches or what you deem is an appropriateness for those corners, and make these changes so that the citizens can feel like they've been heard and yet safety is still a priority?
Your Worship, I think I'll defer that one to staff.
I believe it's going to be based on your recommendations. So,
Well, if we follow the pilot through as envisioned, it should be towards the end of summer, early fall, that 1 year mark is done. That doesn't mean to say that we can't go out and tweak some of the physical locations of the bollards and barriers that have been put up in the interim. I wouldn't imagine trying to do any of that at the earliest until probably springtime, likely April, because I would like to have a good understanding of the winter conditions with this as well. And I think it's important for everyone involved, when you look at this as a holistic strategy, to make sure that we have those winter months under our belt. But you know, I say that from my perspective. I think at the end of the day, I would want to be working with city staff though to be able to give a definitive deadline on that. But from my perspective, that's what I would say is we look at tweaks come spring, and then you know, in the fall of 2025, that's when we would have the fulsome look at it and recommend a potential final strategy to go forward from there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm not in favor till wait until spring. I'd like to see it done next week if possible. Further to that, I think that winter's been holding off for us to make this decision, so I think we should take Mother Nature's call. Yeah, I'm willing to put a recommendation out there if I can do that.
I think council can entertain a motion.
Okay, so my recommendation would be to push the Rosedale Okanagan southeast corner in, I'm gonna say, yeah, I'll say 20 inches. I'll start with that.
Your worship, with all due respect, can I look at the dimensions rather than trying to recommend a specific one in the motion?
Yeah, sure, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let me rephrase that here. So I'd like to recommend that we push Okanagan, Rosedale southeast, right-hand corner, in the appropriate amount as determined by the engineer, and the Rosedale PV southwest corner in the appropriate amount as per the engineer. Does that sound better? Okay, that is my motion.
And if it's okay with you, Councillor Balsar, we just add in there that it's done as soon as possible.
I forgot that part. Can I say next week? As soon as possible sounds good. Thank you.
I'll require a seconder for that motion.
I would second it if we could be a little bit more lenient on the next week part. Things
As soon
don't
as
happen
possible.
that fast with local government. I think we need to talk to our crews and see what they're up to. And I know that it's going to get really cold next week and maybe there's snow after that. So I think we need to be a little bit considerate about their time schedule and the weather conditions. But if we could hold them to the fire, and I know you can't put that in your recommendation, that we get it done as soon as possible, I think that would be a lot better received. I would second it if you were able to make that.
My microphone is still on. Sorry about that. So yeah, no, not next week. My motion is as soon as possible.
Yeah, we also have to allow staff and build that in to do the moving of the boulders once the meetings occur and you come up with an adequate distance. Those could be moved and specifically which ones they are. So the motion, I think, Councillor Fowler, you did second that motion. So I think that will stand. The intent of the motion is to try to alleviate some of these problems that we're hearing about it, and then we'll continue on with the study. So we have a first and seconder. Is there any questions? Councillor Nietzsche, you good?
Your worship, I am going to vote against it only because, not because I don't think of the intent is wrong. I just would prefer to have our professionals complete the pilot, or at least give them till the end of the winter to complete the pilot. We haven't had a lot of snow. And so I think that we need to give that due diligence an opportunity to complete itself so that they can make good professional decisions. So I'm voting against it only based on the timeline, not because I'm necessarily opposed to making minor adjustments to the radiuses.
Thank you for that. Any further comments?
Just so for clarity though, I think if the recommendation has been changed to appropriate timelines for public works and for weather conditions, I think that could be quite a balance between that and April. We haven't had much winter. We may get some winter. It may be April, it may be March, who knows? But I think as long as they've got that on there, I'm okay. We just want to know that there can be some changes. And I really don't think it's up to us to put a date or a time on it. I think that as long as our message is heard, I think that's what we're here for. And I don't mean to be looking at you, Jesse, but I think that I think that we've been heard, and I think that the citizens are going to understand that a little bit more about why we've done what we've done, and that this isn't the final design. And I do believe that we've made our point. So I'm not too worried about the setting a time. I don't know if we can, let's hear what everybody else has to say.
If it makes any difference to Councillor Nietzsche, I just wanted to remind him that it is going to be up to the engineer's discretion. He'll be making, he's not going to move it in 3 feet because, so, but just so that we're all aware that it's still left in the hands of the engineer. It just isn't going to be taken till April.
Any further question? I will call a vote though. All those in favor of the motion? That will be 6-4 and Councillor Nietzsche opposed.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you for your time. And I know, go ahead, Shirley.
I was just going to say, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for listening, and thank you to Interior Health too as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Greatly appreciated. All right. Well, it was a lot longer than that 15 minutes we were talking about. That's okay. And now we're going to move into departmental updates. And just to note that Mr. Smith is going to give a verbal update as he didn't get his report in as he was away last week. So Philippa, please.
Good evening and Happy New Year, Council. Welcome back to the table. We did update our communications section a little bit for you as per your requests. This is as of January 7th when we first pushed out some of the information you asked for. So since the December meeting, we have had 11 Facebook posts with over 23,000 views. YouTube, December 16th, we had 36 views of your council meeting. MailChimp, we were experiencing some issues with our email system, but with the help of MailChimp and also our own IT Sea to Sky, there is a lot of back-end work that needed to be done and some back and forth. And a lot of those emails will finally now not be going into people's spam. So that is a huge win for us. And we are still working on updating the website and just tweaking it as much as we can. So keep any suggestions coming in. Also, the other thing that communications has done is in the old city hall, there were all the councils. They were all framed, all the photos. And we've taken those, take them all out of the frames because they were all starting to look a little ratty, and had them all scanned, put into a book, and it has each year and all the names of the aldermen / now council members in there, right from the first mayor on. We are missing a chunk. I think there's a decade's worth that seem to have vanished, but if we locate them, we will get those done as well.
Sorry. So as we get into the new year then, will we continue with compounding the numbers like for Facebook and that, or will we start anew? Was that just because January 7th was finishing up last year?
It was more because council had requested a general idea of the full amount.
For a year, yeah.
So I think what we'll do is we'll continue doing meeting to meeting, and then we'll do a quarterly, and sort of every quarter we'll give you a full.
Perfect. I think that would have more impact. You'd be able
Yes,
to relate it to
the
something.
bigger numbers help.
Thank you.
And I guess Mr. Ackerman, you'll be up, please.
Sorry, just bringing this up. Quick update from Public Works. We ended our year for water consumption. We have the December 2023, 2024 numbers. You can see we're on that continual downward trend. With the exception of 3 months last year, our consumption was down month over month. So that is a positive increase. The big one there is continuing to use Fortune Creek as our main source for water. Less reliance on our wells as in previous years past. So that's been a benefit. And we'll have some more year-end water information as that's compiled as our year-end water report that we will present to council, just to celebrate some of our achievements in reducing our overall consumption and garnering that better understanding of our available water and how we're utilizing it within the community. Crews responded to 2 water breaks in the month of December. One was a mainline break and the other one was a service line connection. And we are seeing a little bit of movement just with the lack of frost in the ground and some of those older connections. So we were quick to service those, minimal disruption, and hopefully that was it for a little while. We did have an act of vandalism to follow up on the intersection improvements at Rosedale and Pleasant Valley. Reciprocating saw was used to cut off a number of the delineators. An RCMP file was created for that just to document the occurrence. Police are actively investigating a few leads that they've obtained. We've made some revisions and replaced those, but some of those delineators may have to be repaired or actually replaced. We'll see how long the repair lasts for. The other one is the City Hall electrical vehicle charging stations were installed recently. There was a backlog on some of the infrastructure, mainly the pedestal base that we finally got in. It's installed. The next steps for that are actually commissioning those chargers with flow and getting them brought online. And through that process, we do have a few key decisions to make on charging rates, forgiveness of time, a couple different options there that we'll explore as we look to commission those and get them brought online. I would anticipate of a goal of having those actually active for service by mid-February. It's a bit of a process to get the registration and all that stuff worked out, but it is nice to have those finally in place, and I can answer any questions council has.
I was just going to ask about the 2 water main breaks. Was that aging infrastructure or something different?
One we had up in Pheasant Ridge was just a service connection to a curb stop under a driveway. And we do have a few areas with some hot soils that does wear through the copper. So that was, we see a fair bit of that. And then the other one was service connection on Becker underneath the road from the main line. And that was actually a relatively quick fix. And that was on December 23rd in the evening, and crews wrapped it up midday on the 24th. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thanks, Brad. Ms. Cordell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just put up a few statistics for year end, and I just for context, because I've noticed a bit of an uptick this year in our development numbers, I wanted to show the last 10 years. So you could see we had a bit of a slowdown, I would say directly linked to COVID and at least in our unit counts that were being developed. But this year we had 16 new housing units, which I think is a really good news story for Armstrong. And it brings us up closer to kind of more historical levels. I'm anticipating seeing even potentially more next year, which will bring us back. So I just wanted to give you a bit of context. You're always seeing the short term, but this is a bit longer of a term numbers. In terms of development applications, you can see there wasn't a ton of development applications. I think a lot of the work that we've done over the last year has eliminated the need for some of these applications. So instead of needing a development permit for a secondary suite, you can just get a secondary suite or for a carriage house. So I think doing some of that streamlining work has reduced our number of permits, which is a really good news story as well. Also, we've been really focused on some of the big picture official community plan and zoning bylaw rewrites. And I think some people were maybe holding off on their applications because they knew it'd be easier once those things were in place. And that's about all I have for you today.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Lori. And Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Within community services, there's a number of focuses going on currently that we were staging back prior to the 31st of December, and one being the dog licensing program and the transition to the DocuPet program. So we are in an administrative process that will be taking place over the next 4 to 6 weeks that will involve a lot of data transferring, GIS mapping, throwing of glasses, a lot of combining and merging of information between our current program that we manage within Maze and transferring it to their program. Once that process is complete, we're anticipating that we'll be starting the public notification with a full transfer and a soft launch set for March 17th of this year. So at this point, things are going extremely well. A lot of research into going back into finding existing dog owners and ensuring that all the information is accurate and up to date. So there's been a lot of work done by our clerks to get us to the point that we're at today. Under FireSmart, there's been a number of changes. The resume intakes for the coordinator position were completed on Friday, and we received 18 different applicants. We've narrowed it down to 7 different individuals that staff and the fire chief are looking at and scoring. And from there, we'll reduce that down to a couple of online interviews and then face-to-face interviews. So we're hoping that we should have an individual selected probably hopefully within a 2-week period. And then we're still aiming for that mid-February launch of having that person in place. We did award the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan to Diamond Head Consulting. They are based out of Vancouver, but do have staff that are based within the Okanagan. They came with extremely high recommendations. A number of the other communities that have worked with them said they over and achieved everything that they provided. And so we're really looking forward to them. They have a lot of experience in doing these projects. We did have a couple of other really good opportunities, but they just weren't at the same level. But I think we'll be getting a very good end product that'll set our community up to having a very strong understanding of where our risks are, what we can do to mitigate some of those risks, and then having that long-term foundation that we can apply to other projects and plans within our community. Next, I had the opportunity, was invited by the FireSmart coordinator out of the city of Vernon to participate in last week's SenseNet project. They basically lit the hillside on fire with some burn piles and used the technology of SenseNet to determine when that fire started, what that fire was made up, and how aggressive it was. Pretty phenomenal infrastructure that they have in place within the Predator Ridge area that allowed them to be able to do this. They have cameras that can seek heat, can seek smoke particles up to 30 kilometers away. So in discussions with their staff, for example, they were aware of the Hull car fire. So they have that opportunity to monitor out as far as within 30 kilometers. You know, the camera equipment's pretty incredible that you can look from Predator Ridge across to the opposite side of the lake and basically make out what type of tree that you're looking at. Very detailed information. They even have a little robot dog that wanders around. So if you go on to Castanet, you'll see some of those, see more information on the program and the project. So it's in hopes that there'll be other communities, other utility providers that will be able to use this type of equipment that will help us really detect ignition points and be able to assist us in preventing what is potentially, as we know, some pretty bad, scary situations that can develop very quickly. So if we have that ability to sense and detect on a very quick response, it'll give us that opportunity to get on it and respond and mitigate quickly. As council is aware, we're going to be continuing to participate and continue on our journey of Indigenous cultural safety training. There is 2 dates that we have set, March 11th and 12th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. that will take place at the Public Safety Building. Invitations will be sent out to staff and council and some other members of our community to participate in this opportunity. We'll be privileged to be working with Eric Mitchell and Chris Marchant, who are 2 of the elders of the Okanagan Indian Band. They have been actually doing this work within our community, within universities for a very long time. They are very proud of the work they do. They come with a phenomenal reputation. And I think even though we have done some of this training already, they're going to really bring it home and give us the opportunity to look at specific details of our history within our valley, within our region, and the impacts that history has had on them, and looking at ways that we can move forward with reconciliation. So I look forward to having council attend those 2 dates. There was a rumor that we wanted some snowpack information. There hasn't been significant changes, but the 2 stations that we use are Silver Star Mountain and then up at Hunter's Range. So currently Silver Star Mountain is sitting at 100% of normal, and Hunter's Range is at 102% of normal. So even though we're not seeing the amounts building up here in the valley bottom, we still have a long time to go. As Councillor Fowler noted, there is potentially weather changing, that we may see some cooler temperatures, and with that possibly some precipitation, that we will see some snow within the valley bottom, but it's just a prediction. But at this point, we don't foresee there any concerns at this time. We are still making up for being in a drought, but we also have still another 3 to 4 months of snow to build up within our mountaintops.
Thank you, Warren. A couple of things come to mind. The SenseNet cameras, they brought them to Regional District and did a presentation for us, but I believe that Vernon only had maybe 1, maybe 2 at the time, or maybe they came after the first one was installed. Have you heard of any uptick in the outlying areas putting any cameras? Pretty amazing what they're doing.
Through the mayor, thank you. So I'm not aware of any other communities that have looked at taking on this project. I know Vernon was one of 2 communities that was selected in the project or in the province to go forward with this project. Predator Ridge looked at the opportunity, invested funds in it. So the hopes is that other investors will come forward, other utility companies that may be able to utilize this data and information to protect their infrastructure, and ultimately communities would benefit from it as well.
Awesome. One other question about the snowpack. So I was doing a little research on where we were sitting with our snowpack on Saturday, and it depends what site you look at. One site, I proudly announced that we were at 68% of normal. Oh, that sounds pretty good. And then I'm Googling a little more, and then one's 38%. I went, wow, that melted quickly. So is there, I know you have a site that we're not all privy to. Is there a specific site that you think is more accurate when people are wondering about snowpack? Because I think what's getting interfered with is the groomed lanes at the ski hills. I think we had 53 inches at Silver Star, and that's not what we're looking for, right?
So the data that we receive from the province is quite different than what you would get from the mountain resorts. So we were sitting at 68% of normal as of December 1st. As of January 1st, we've seen that increased amount of precipitation that's come forward. If you just Google BC provincial snowpack, it'll bring you directly to the provincial website. There's a large amount of data that's provided within there, whether it is mapping or the breakdown of the percentages. But if you even put in specifics to Silver Star Mountain, you could end up with their base of information, which won't be as accurate as to the overall snowpack.
I was leaving out the word provincial.
Anything further? Councillor Todd.
I just want to commend you and staff for being ahead of the curve on the wildfire and the what am I trying to say here? The prevention of fire smarting. Just because, especially after what we've seen with our neighbors to the south, I mean, what I was listening to today on the radio said that, climate change used to affect the poor, and now it's affecting everybody, and now it affects the rich, and people start actually listening to it now. And I think you guys were ahead of the curve on that. I just want to say that it's a very important job you're doing.
Thank you. Going forward, you're just picking up your next package. Yes, community services joint application for ESS grant funding.
Thank you, Your Worship, for letting me get my steps in. So to date, I bring you information regarding the request to proceed forward with a joint application for UBCM ESS funding. This joint application would be in partnership with the Township of Spalmsheen to secure up to $50,000. There may be a little bit of a variance there because there may be some additional equipment that may be applied for. But the basis of this funding is to support ESS efforts to support evacuees. When the city of Armstrong completed an after-action review, there was a number of things that stood out for us that we could do a better job to accommodate the evacuees. In 2021, we had individuals that were in our fairgrounds for 40 days. If we all recall, the beginning of that support that we provided, we were in extreme high temperatures, and we had people camping that were out in the open. One of the things that we ended up on having to do was to bring in generators. We had to make accommodations and changes to our existing electrical system to try and support those individuals that were staying within their recreational vehicles. So the request that we would like to proceed forward would be to enhance and change and what's the word I'm looking for? Upgrade, support the existing electrical system that we have in place that would allow us to better accommodate evacuees by improving health and safety opportunities for those individuals. We are asking that the city of Armstrong be the lead applicant for the funding, that we would be the holder of the funds, and this would be done in support with the Township of Spalmsheen. There are some additional equipment that we are trying to identify that we may apply for so we can maximize the funds that are available. On a minimum, we would only have $40,000, but as a joint application, we can definitely set a higher amount. Being a joint application, both communities would benefit from this opportunities. So there's a recommendation that council support a joint grant application with the Township of Spalmsheen to the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for Emergency Social Services Program Capacity Building. That's the word I was looking for, capacity building. And that the city of Armstrong be the lead funding applicant, and that further that the city of Armstrong be the recipient of the funds for the project.
Thank you, Warren. Moved by Councillor Wayner, seconder Councillor Valstar. Any questions for Warren? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that will be carried unanimously. Thank you, Warren.
Thank you.
And I guess Terry. Is that correct? Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next step in the budget process is a recommendation in the report in front of you for first three readings of the bylaw. The bylaw itself contains two schedules. The first schedule, Schedule A, is a consolidated version of the five-year budget. The presentation is a little bit different than what you were used to when you were looking and deliberating over the budget last month, and there's a couple reasons for that. Provincial legislation requires that certain elements be separately shown in the budget bylaw. Specifically, an example would be parcel taxes. Normally, we would not include that as a separate item because it's so small in comparison to other aspects. However, we are required to show that separately. Another reason for the slight change in presentation in the bylaw itself is that public sector accounting standards dictate certain elements in the traditional budget to be removed for purposes of dovetailing to year-end financial statements. For example, transfers to and from reserves are removed, capital projects are removed, principal payments on debt are removed. So that is reflected in the top 2/3 of Schedule A. So there are sometimes competing requirements all in one document, unfortunately, but we have to incorporate all of that in the document. The bottom of that schedule, thankfully, there is a reconciliation where it is all of those elements that were removed are added back to show the public and to show council that the budget is balanced. There is no cash surplus in any of the 5 years. So that's an explanation of this bit of a complicated schedule, but again, there's some competing requirements there that require all of those elements to be shown. Schedule B shows several policy statements, 2 of which are required by provincial legislation. The first one being the proportion of revenue. And again, the revenue sources that are shown there are dictated by provincial legislation. So again, parcel taxes have to be shown, even though it's only 0.27% of total revenue. Proceeds from borrowing also is a required element that has to be shown. Distribution of property taxes is also required, and that is in that policy statement. The remaining ones in Schedule B are ones that we have added for purposes of just transparency to the public. So tax increases for infrastructure, as well as for policing and the use of permissive tax exemptions. So staff is recommending that bylaw 1933 be given first 3 readings tonight. Oh, one more thing I should add is there was one final change to the budget that was put into the bylaw, and that is the joint fire service review that joint council approved in the fall. It was missed in the original version of the budget, but it is included. Joint council approved $30,000 to fund the fire review. $5,000 in consulting fees was already included in the original fire budget, so an additional $25,000 has been added. Armstrong's share of approximately $11,000 is going to be coming from existing consultation and legal fee budget for administration. So that is what's being used to fund that additional amount. So that change has been incorporated in the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So we do have a motion on the table. We have a motion, Councillor Weiner. Thank you. A seconder, Councillor Dropala. And now I'll ask for any questions. Councillor Fowler.
I'll just have to trust you on some of that stuff.
Councillor Weiner.
Just a comment. I got some feedback. There we go. The fire services, the original $5,000 from what I recall from the budget, just thinking through now, was for the strategic planning process in case it comes forward again in this budget cycle or next budget cycle, which was over and above the review. So just something that I just thought of now, but the original purpose was what was earmarked for that 5,000 was the strategic planning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, I will call the vote on all those in favor. And that will be carried unanimously. Thank you, Terry. And Ms. Cordell, you're back. Councillor Balser.
I have to declare a conflict and I have to leave the room. Or conflict of interest.
Very good, sir. Thank you.
Sorry, I just need to know why you're declaring.
I'm declaring a conflict of interest because NJ something or other, I work for those guys. NSJ, yes. They're the ones that triggered it.
Yeah, sorry, but is that relevant to? the
I
number-
stepped out for the last one.
I know, we've had some discussions in a roundtable since then, and many things have come to light. I'm not sure, I'm asking, I don't know to step out from this. I'm gonna go to Philippa as the expert here for us.
When it comes to declaring any conflict of interest, basically boils down to what the counselor believes. If there could be any perceived conflict, then absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Velstar.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, as you know, we talked about this at the last council meeting. And in your council package was the same report that was submitted, completely unchanged. In your report, or in your, wow, in the council package. So what I've done instead is just prepared a little presentation just as a refresher of what we're talking about. And then just to maybe, I feel like having a visual will help us just talk about it. I don't know if there's a ton in there. I've also, in this presentation, I'm going to suggest some on the fly changes to the resolution that might help provide clarity. And I think this is one of those cases where grammar actually is or punctuation or something is our friend, because I've split the resolution in two and it becomes way clearer when I do that. So just as a quick refresher for those who are listening, community amenity charges are meant to account for the future impacts of population growth on infrastructure. We have already amended our current policy to incentivize smaller and multiple units by creating a bit of a staggered costing. So if you're putting in a single family, you pay the full amount. If you're putting in 3 units, you pay based on the bedroom size of those units. So meant to encourage more density. As we know, these will be replaced with proper formal development cost charges within the next year. That's the goal anyways. We have received in the interim a request to consider eliminating the cost charges for secondary suites. So that's what kind of brought us here today. My original recommendations, and still, is that we use the legislation that's been put in place for development cost charges to integrate that dollar value cutoff for projects. So project would be less than $50,000. You wouldn't have to pay development cost charges, regardless of the size of the suite or what you're doing. I would like to ensure that the suite is less than half the size of the house so that we're not seeing actually a duplex being covered as a suite when really it's a duplex. And then the recommendation is to reduce the cost of the charge for the suites that have to pay to 50% of that $15,000 total. So I've recommended some changes to the resolution that was put forward, which are in red, and then also by breaking it into 2 things. So the resolution would be to increase the adjustment factor for secondary suites to 50% for 1 suite per dwelling unit if it occupies less than half of that dwelling unit. And then also by adding an exemption for any projects that have a construction value less than 50,000. Now is it in here? Yeah, we've just received actually we've just approved a secondary suite going in one of the new houses being built around town. And the construction value for that was actually less than $50,000. So it was in a new build building. They had submitted it without the suite. They added the suite. The construction value they submitted was about 30,000, but when we reviewed it against, they're doing more than just changing the suite. They're doing some living space in the basement that is for the primary residence. So that bumped it up close to 50,000, but the suite itself was below that 50,000 threshold. So I think that gives us some indication that a number of the suites, if they're not huge and they're not super fancy, will come below that $50,000 threshold. Unless maybe the house is really, really old and the fire separation upgrades are very expensive, which is possible. So There's a bunch of variables, but I think 50,000, which is the number in the legislation, may cover a lot of the suites for us. So I can't even read my presentation. So considerations, the additional people that are arriving in these suites do have an incremental impact on our infrastructure. They're anticipated to house slightly smaller family units than a full single family dwelling. So it would be a smaller impact than a full single family dwelling. I know that from the conversation we had at the last time, council was trying to figure out how do we separate out sort of mom and pops that are trying to build suites. But really, there's no fair way to separate out. If you're building a suite, you're building a suite. It doesn't matter if it's in a new building or if it's in townhouses or what you're doing. There's no equitable way to just say if a homeowner's building a suite, we create some kind of exemption. Because then you have to say, well, what if somebody builds townhouses and in 1 year they put all suites in, or like, it just is too complicated. So I think we need to look at an all or nothing. We either support suites and are reducing the cost of putting them in at the cost of funds going to our infrastructure, and to what level. It's creating that balance in our community. We need to put money away for the impacts to infrastructure that more people bring, but we also want to incentivize this. Now, we're not a big community. So some of the other communities, when I worked in Vernon, we had this conversation with council, but we had a much larger tax base to absorb the impact of those extra people on the infrastructure. In Armstrong, we're a pretty small tax base. We're primarily residential, as we just saw in Terry's presentation, which gives us limited ability to absorb the impact of that extra population on our infrastructure. So that's why I'm not recommending we go to zero. That's why I'm recommending we keep it at 50%. It keeps some money going in, but it really does reduce the cost for developers. And I'll just remind you, of course, that this is an interim measure until the formal development cost charges come forward. These have a very technical approach that involves lots of studies. You have to figure out exactly which projects are triggered by this growth and how much they'll cost and how to apportion it. So whereas we're having more of a, I would say, a conversation about values and what we want to do, the development cost charges will be very technical and straightforward and detailed. So with all that conversation, this is the resolution that I talked about, that the community amenity contribution policy number 1-100-4 be amended by increasing the adjustment factor for secondary suites to 50% for 1 suite per dwelling unit. So if somebody's building 2, that wouldn't be covered. And if it occupies less than half of that dwelling unit, and by adding an exemption for projects that have a construction value less than 50,000.
Thank you, Ms. Cordell. Do we have a mover? Councillor Weiner, and a seconder, Councillor Todd. And now we'll open the floor for discussion. Councillor Drapala.
Thank you, Worship. I think knowing that the $50,000 exemption is actually applicable to current construction projects that are out there makes me feel a lot better about this. So I think that captures my desire to kind of exempt those mom and pop houses that want to put in a small suite if it's below that value.
So that is in the legislation for development cost charges, but we haven't been applying it because we don't have cost charges, just to make sure.
Yeah, but I like that approach. Thank you.
A couple of questions. When we do have our DCCs written, this takes place of everything, correct?
That is correct. So our community amenity contribution policy was an informal form of development cost charges. And the province, when they made those sweeping changes to the legislation, has said you can no longer use that tool. You need to now develop a formal development cost charge to take its place. The only thing outside of that would be the park contributions, because they're a separate matter.
Then my next question would be that really this is a stab in the dark with the numbers that we're looking at. I think that council needs to come into agreement that we do require funds to upgrade and support infrastructure moving forward. Is there something that we can do if we were to agree to the numbers provided And then when we do our development cost charges to see there's a huge discrepancy, to look at rebates or something for applicants that went under this, seeing as though in less than a year, we will have an official provincial policy to move forward.
So your worship, of course, I would say all of those things are at council's discretion. However, I think it would be complicated because then would you rebate people from this date forward for the decision now and the people who've ever paid a community amenity charge? Because in theory, they paid quite a lot more, right? So I think that's a conversation that if council desires to have it, we can have it. I just think it's not a simple, straightforward thing. And I think it's very unlikely that that it would be a significantly lower number.
Just ask for us at council, just how they feel about that, if they offer any opinion.
About the rebate or?
Like, this is just a stopgap measure until we get this written rule that will be applicable moving forward as a consistent basis. So if we're out of touch with our numbers today, it would be a penalty for somebody to apply today versus waiting for the DCCs to come in. Councillor Wayner.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd like to see where the numbers land first, and then if there was a discrepancy, maybe consider it then. But I don't even know. It could be low, and then how, and we'd be looking to claw something back. We wouldn't do that, and then how far back do we go? So for me, I'd like to see where it lands, and then have the conversation about how to address it.
I think I'm similar to Councillor Wayner. I think what I like about the 50,000, and if it's, especially if it's legislated for the DCCs, then it's almost like an interim step towards what the DCCs will potentially be. So I'm thinking that it's going to smooth out that impact along the way instead of creating an unfair impact now compared to. But if it is, I'd be open to looking at that afterwards if we realize that we missed the mark.
No further comments or questions? Councilor Nietzsche, you're good? Thank you. Then moving forward, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion? And that will be carried unanimously by the room. Councillor Bellstar is absent.
Your worship, while there's a break, I do have to excuse myself. I do have to go to work, so have to apologize to council, but I do have to step out.
Your worship, just before you bring Councillor Valstar in. So I don't even like to raise this, and it isn't in my report, but we've only started charging fees since the new zoning bylaw, right? For secondary suites. We had somebody that we're charging today that hasn't yet picked up their building permit, so we'll be able to, I think, amend their charges based on today. I'm hesitant to even bring this up, but how do you feel about the people who paid a higher rate between June and now, given that you've decided to reduce the rate?
It's something I have not contemplated. I don't know. Well, I think we would need some time probably to mull this over.
And bring a report forward.
Things do change, but I think,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we could have a report drafted of how many that would affect and sort of the numbers that we were looking at. That would be very beneficial moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okie dokie. So in previous years, council has always attended assorted conferences, conventions, Habitually, it's been the SILGA, so the Southern Ontario Local Government Association, and also UBCM, and that's the Union of British Columbia Municipal. This year, we have thrown another one into the mix, and that is the federal convention, and it is actually in Ottawa. So we've compiled a few numbers for council, and we have what is budgeted for you. And we did a few estimates on each of the conventions. The registration amounts are pretty much on the dot. The hotels, some we already knew. For example, the UBCM, we already have some rooms reserved, and we also have rooms reserved for SILGA. The transportation, I mean, that's going to depend on either gas prices or how much you get your flight for and how much the ferry is. So there are always going to be a few variances. For example, hotels, the ones that the convention actually is in, generally they're a little more costly than ones that are a little farther away. But at the same time, being in those hotels is also a huge benefit because you do have a lot of the networking that goes on, which is very large impact on the council and also on the city and for the networking with the other governments and associations that are out there. So there's many different things to take into consideration with this. For the conferences, we do have a policy that council determines how many, who goes where, which conferences, which conventions that council determines they would like their members to go to. So as this is an item in a budget, staff has actually recommended as well that once council returns, that we have even just a page on the website that has almost like a follow-up write-up saying, you know, great event, managed to meet with this minister, which happens at UBCM, and or managed to get in touch with such and such group that helps provide grants and met so-and-so and learned this and learned that, just sort of a brief write-up so the residents actually know what council is doing, because really that has not been done very much. So tonight, as registrations are coming and flights are being booked and hotels are being reserved, I am requesting that council decides what conventions they wish to send people to and how many, and if possibly, I would love to know who, so we can actually attach names into there for the reservations. It just makes it a little easier for check-in time.
Thank you, Philippa. I'll open the floor for discussion. Councillor Velster.
Unfortunately, I can't make any of the conferences this year.
Todd?
I plan on going to UBCM.
Yeah, personally, I won't be able to attend any of the conferences. Maybe are we going to do that part first and then talk about the requirements on the website and the written reports and stuff second, or?
Sure.
Okay.
So because we weren't able to get hotel rooms close to the conference this year, I had thought about, well, maybe I should look at, for the first time in 20 years, going to FCM. And so I did, and that will be cheaper than going to Victoria. So $229 for a room for 4 nights. Airfare will run around 6 or 7. I didn't bring figures, but 6 or 7. UBCM, if it's 5 days, $100 per diem for 5 days. FCM is only 3. And although there is the opportunity to apply for per diem for travel, I've never done that on the travel days. I have only put in per diem for the days that I'm at a conference. So it will come to about no more than $3,800 to go to FCM. So I am going to go to, I mean, I would like to go to FCM. I do have to go to UBCM or yes, UBCM for a couple of the meetings that I'm involved in, but I believe there are expenses paid for that if that's the only thing I'm going down there for. So I think the bottom line is if there is a budget amount in the budget for counselors that want to go, as long as we don't exceed that budget amount, I would question if there's any reason why it has to be one or the other. If we go over that budget amount, we pay it for ourselves. I wonder why we're worrying about that right now. So I would like to request that I go for 3 days to FCM, and it will cost no more than it would cost to go to UBCM. I have the documents at home if you need me to bring it and prove it. And it is the closest hotel to the convention. in Ottawa.
I really ask, since I've never been to one of those, I don't know what it brings, what I'm assuming it's similar, but if we're staying with the, staying within the confines of the province, it's all specifically regarding our municipalities and our day-to-day operations. I understand networking and stuff like that, but I am a believer that networking should probably be done in our province. With the people that are facing the same scenarios as we are, because the rules change as soon as you leave the province of BC. Just my opinion.
So the thing about FCM is that there are people from our province that go there. And if we balance out some people going to UBCM and some going to FCM, I see that as an advantage for the city.
So one of the reasons that we brought this report forward was because last year we did have an additional person going to UBCM. So it did send us into a little bit of a panic, maybe not quite a panic, but ooh, weren't expecting that. So we needed to come up with the funds and sort of transfer some over from elsewhere. So there is that. And also we don't obviously budget enough for everyone to go everywhere. So this way it gives you a chance to discuss it amongst yourselves. And obviously now we know that there are 2 counselors that are not going to be able to attend any. So that really eases what's happening. For the FCM, I have worked in one other municipality that at the time I was there sent someone for the first time. It was the mayor and their CAO went. And they came back fired up. Our mayor had made some amazing connections and grants started popping up. So there's that aspect as well. And for that community, it has been quite beneficial enough so that they sent more counselors next year and more the year after.
I just add that there are people from last year went from Vernon, from regional district electoral areas, people from Salmon Arm, including one of the ladies who's now on the executive with FCM. So it's not an unusual pie in the sky suggestion to have somebody go.
Wanted to throw out there that the only one that really fits into my schedule at the moment would be the FCM. The other ones would be a struggle for me, and I wouldn't know if I could go to the UBCM probably until May, if it's possible at all. So the opportunity, I have been to the UBCM twice, and just to offset that with the FCM, if it's an advantage to the city, which it could be, would be of interest to me.
I just, on a further note, I think that would we budget for 4 people out of the 7? Is that what the budget is? Would we budget for 4 people to go? Well, for any conference, what is the budget amount in our budget for conference attendance by elected officials?
Can you scroll through the report for me, please?
I know that. I'm wondering how many we budget for.
Up of church.
I know how much we have in a budget
In the
for each
budget?
person.
Okay,
I'm wondering how many we budget for.
that's the amount. We have, I believe this year we have reserved for 5.
Okay. I really think that if 5 is fine, I don't have a problem with that. But if it was 4, I think with new people on council especially, that the conferences are valuable. It's not taking time off and it's not going on a holiday. We don't go away for 6 weeks vacations or anything like that. We go to FCM and we work. And I think that an opportunity for anybody who wants to go should be available. But if it's at 5, and we know that there are people who work full-time that have to take off work time and lose out on their holiday time to go there. I think that, that's something we should be considering at budget time as to a rough idea of how many think they would like to go. I don't think anybody should be held back from going on the conferences. And especially if we have a limit of $4,000, no matter which conference, very, very comparable, as long as you don't go over that $4,000. And if it goes over, we pay out of our pocket. I don't really see there's any issue there at all.
I really want to go to the conferences. It just doesn't work this year. But I just wanted to comment on like how valuable it is that we have representation from Armstrong at these conferences, where we have the ability to learn things that we wouldn't normally learn, meet people, make connections, and continue connections that happen year after year. Those connections are so valuable, and I got to see it for the first time last year. For a short period of time, but I think that FCM, I think that going federally, I think that is an absolute. I think it's an excellent opportunity for the taxpayers of Armstrong to send representation there for that, and I fully support us sending people out that way. And UBCM, it doesn't sound like we're going to have a huge amount of people, or I guess not quite as much. But yeah, these conferences are important.
I agree with Councillor Velstra that I think especially the FCM one would be real great experience to let the rest of the world know that Armstrong exists. And just to put it out there that it would be, yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea personally.
I would just like to let council know that I am aware that Councillor Nietzsche would also like to attend FCM.
Yeah, I do think there's a really good, real opportunity to also, hear best practices from other provinces as well. I think we think that our problems might differ amongst provinces and the influence may not be there, but I think from what I've heard, there's a real opportunity to get some new ideas to develop best practices, to bring things back, and even just a perspective that we may not have thought of things in a particular way but we are having the same problem. So I think there's a lot of advantage there. The question I have though is budget for staff or for our CAO or interim CAO to attend some of these conferences. When I attend, I notice there a lot of times there is a staff member there, and I mean, to come back all fired up with great ideas is great, but it's really nice to have someone there from staff to bounce it off of and to get them fired up as well, and to implement it. And maybe it's more efficient, I think, in my mind, to do it that way. Is there a budget for that?
So the, excuse me, CAO budget comes out of a separate pot, and there is budget for the CAO to attend the UBCM and SILGA, I believe. Yes? Yes.
I think that, having, as long as somebody is going to UBCM, that's great. UBCM in Victoria has always been a conference that is so much busier. There's probably less people, but it's a congested area for the conference to be held at. The meeting rooms are smaller. There's walking to the different hotels to take part of them. And I do believe that the one in Vancouver is so big. It's the biggest. The one in Whistler is usually pretty good too. But Victoria is busier because you're always on the go somewhere to another area, another meeting room. And the speakers, the trade show, they're just, it's a smaller venue for that for sure. But with somebody going to UBCM and one or two, whatever, going to FCM, as long as, you know, we get our reservations in early. And this, I do know that Councillor Nitschy looked at the hotel room that is right across from the convention center. And that wasn't even blocked off yet for the conference rate, and the hotel room was $229. And I don't think you're going to get that in Victoria.
I've already booked my room at the, and I think it's cheaper than, I'll talk to you about it, but I've got, you know, I got Black Friday deal, so. In Victoria.
So there seems to be an interest in everything. I don't know if a motion is required or not for any of this, Philippa.
I think there seems to be a very general consensus. So even if I can have a general motion, so we're following our policy that council supports, or that attendance to the 3 different conventions be supported. And then I can figure out the rest from there.
Okay, moved by Councillor Todd, second.
And I'll second that, but I think it would be okay to add in there as long as we don't exceed the budgeted amount, and therefore it's not causing any havoc for staff or other councillors or whatever there may be.
Watching you finish your notes. Okay, I will then call a question. All those in favor? And I will show as opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Drop.
Can we comment on the part about the written report? Or I know that wasn't in the motion, but I like the idea of transparency for the public, but I'm not really in favor of counselors providing a written report. And I think I can say this because I'm not going to any of the conferences, but I think if you take the time to write the report and it sits there and maybe someone looks at it online or maybe they don't, but I think there's a lot of value in having those conversations around this table after we get back about what you did at there. And so there's transparency that way. And maybe if we want to put something in writing, it can even just be that these counselors are going and this is what they're registered in. And that doesn't need to be onerous, but it shows that counselors are registered in these things. And then for more details, it can just be the conversations, because then at least there's questions that can be asked. And I always worry about spending time writing reports and throwing them online where they just kind of sit, or if they go on someone's bookshelf and you put all that effort in and no one's looking at it.
So
Yes, so our previous mayor would always gather us together before the conferences that we were going to, and we'd talk about what's on the agenda, and you go there and you go there. So we covered everything. And then when we came back to our council meeting, we always had something on our agenda where we spoke about the different ones we were at. So we had 10, 15 minutes, whatever. But since Mayor Pieper has been gone, we haven't had that opportunity to speak at a council meeting about things that happen at regional district or sterile insect or hospital board or conferences or whatever. So if there's an appetite for that to come back, that's great, because I really miss that. I feel that when taxpayers' money is being spent, that they should be able to understand some of the benefits of that. I also feel that way. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at the regional district. I go, nobody else knows unless they read the agenda when it comes. Same thing with the hospital board. I think it's a real gap that's come up, and it's not about conference money. It's about sharing the information that various counselors do over and above their job around the table that every counselor should be made aware of. So I think that's a deeper issue that we need to look at. I don't think to me, it's not centered about coming back and making sure that how is that worded in here, that we make every effort to whatever. You go to conferences, that's what you do. So I really do think that I was a little offended by this entire item coming forward the way it did. And I think that there's a way to communicate with mayor and council to get a whole bunch of this stuff sorted out and not have to do it all in public like this. That's just my opinion, but I have never seen a problem at conferences we had one counselor years ago who you would see for the meals and the socials, and that would be about it. I can tell you in the conferences that I've gone to that we are on our feet and on the go all day. And yes, maybe there's a gap one afternoon or one evening or something, but the amount of work and effort and social ability that goes into learning and understanding and sharing of information with other counselors and other speakers that we hear, it's invaluable in my mind. This will be, well, the second to the last maybe opportunity that I ever have, but I'd like to leave this conversation encouraging anybody who can go. I think they should be made allowed to be going. And if there's too much money left in the budget at the end of the year and people don't use it, great, can always be used. But I have a different opinion apparently about conferences than some, and that's just my opinion.
Yeah, just a comment, maybe I'm that guy who types everything out and makes sure I have all my notes so that I can reference them, and it's easier for me and I share them. I know in our workplace when we go to conferences and we have our, just even our point form notes, it just sparks those conversations from others. So I find a lot of value in it from even just my workplace when we do conferences and we come back and say, you know, these are the point form notes, and that's why I put them out there in case it sparks any conversation. And then why later on I'll go back and I'll reference them. So for me, I find them helpful, and I can get everyone processes information differently. Maybe it's just a discussion at the table, but for me, I'm happy to continue with what I'm doing in notes and whatnot. And if that works for other people, and if they don't read it, that's fine, because I do.
And for me, I'm quite content to write down where I was, but I don't think it's imperative that I write down everything that I learned that day. And I agree with Councillor Draplin. This is the forum to discuss those things when we come back and have that discussion, not to lead item by item what I sat and listened to for that hour all day long, every day for 5 days. I don't think the citizens particularly, they care that we're not wasting their money. They don't care what I listen to all day. So, and I understand Councillor Werner perfectly, because that's exactly how he does things. And it makes it easier for him, but I don't work that way. So I think everybody's different and we work to our strengths.
May I? Please, through your worship. Couple of things to tackle. So I probably should have jumped in a little earlier over here. So the posting things up on the website is more of a communications piece, not necessarily a detail, but I completely understand what you're saying. So as Councillor Draplo was speaking, another thought or idea that popped up is we can even just do on our social media a daily, hey, this is what your council is doing today. Boom, 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 done, finished. I mean, that is something easy. It gets it out there. And it also will help keep everyone engaged in what exactly council is doing. As for updating on the committees and the different boards that you sit on that Councillor Fowler brought up, we have added in at the end a segment just for that piece. So I've had a couple of councillors submit something. Once again, we have asked for it in writing. The only reason that I have asked for it in writing is because sometimes people tend to chat on and on and on and lose their way and go off in one tangent and go off in the other tangent. And this sort of keeps things focused. This is quickly what we did. Are there any questions? Oh, I can add this. Boom, done. Move on to the next one. Because if we have all 7 of you suddenly start speaking and going off in different directions, it's going to be another 2 hours before your meeting wraps up and the first person's lost. So that is why I've requested that you submit even point form stuff that Emily can then transform into something to go onto the agenda. If that doesn't work for council, it's absolutely something we can revisit.
Just to move on to the last thing, I also keep fairly detailed notes, and I don't submit them to everybody, but I do have them as a reference. And having said that, I think the highlights of the day perhaps would be a great alternative. Which meetings you attended, not necessarily the point form what you learned, but what meetings you attended, which ministers or deputy ministers that you had a conversation with and regarding which topic that affects the community. If that's on there, I think that would be very valuable.
I think something like that can be even a personal decision. If Councillor Todd says, you know what, no, I'm just happy with X and Y going out, but if you, Mr. Mayor, think, no, I want people to know, then we can push that out as well. We can do both, as long as there's a steady form of communication coming, because these are huge events.
As well, the last UBCM, you wanted information every day what we were doing, and we did that, and that worked out perfectly for me. And from my point of view, I think that's exactly how it should be. You're on, and then it's on there, you're on there every day. People want to look, they can look, instead of waiting for the, you know, how long is it going to be after we get back from UBCM? It could be 3 weeks before our next meeting. Depends on how the schedules play out. And they've all, you know, people have forgotten by then. And so I think in their face as it's happening is much more appropriate than 2 weeks down the road.
I'd just like to share kind of, to wrap this up, kind of a fun thing that happened. So we all get our agendas and we're looking at stuff. And yesterday I got a text from a counselor that said, I'm just wondering if you could forward me your full written report from UBCM so I can aspire to try and do the same. And I looked at this, I was just finishing up with the meeting and I said, yes, can I send you something when I get home? And then all of a sudden, ha ha ha, I was just kidding. But the kidding is that I also, like Councillor Wayner, when I'm in my meetings, I have a book or a paper or a slip or whatever, and I have all kinds of written things. And I knew I had that little clip of all the stuff I did at UBCM. So I was thinking, oh man, I have to go and write all this up out. But it was a good joke. And it did bring to attention that we do take notes, and that is my learning. And then we can talk about them after, and that's the good thing too. So I think the sharing of information is really key. I really do. I don't understand why we haven't been doing it. So it's been a good discussion for that reason. Thank you.
All right, I think that winds that up. Good discussion, everybody. Next, we're moving on to 6.5, the 2025 fleet replacement funding.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the 2025 budget has a project for the replacement of 2 light-duty pickups to be replaced with either fully electric models or hybrid models in order to carry on with our goal of being more environmentally conscious in our fleet. The climate action funding of $40,000 was to be used for this purchase, along with $100,000 from the equipment replacement reserve, for a total of $140,000. The province just notified the city this week that the amount of climate action funding received in 22 and 23, which was approximately $154,000, needs to be fully spent by March 31st of this year, unless we get an extension approved by the province. Virtually all of that has been utilized except for $15,000. So this has caused us to fast track our replacement of these 2 vehicles. So procurement has been in process already. But due to the limited options available for hybrid or electric pickups, we're looking at sole sourcing. So staff has been negotiating for the purchase of 2 brand new 2024 Ford F-150 hybrid units. With the negotiation, their substantial discounts have been agreed to by the dealer. Right now, they are willing to provide both units all in for $140,000, including bed liners, except for taxes. So GST, of course, we get back. We don't need to budget for GST, but PST on this kind of a vehicle is at 10%, not 7%. So we are short by approximately $14,000 for this purchase. So staff is recommending that council authorize an additional $14,000 from the 2 reserves. It would be $4,000 from climate action and $10,000 from equipment replacement to make up that shortfall.
Thank you, Terry. We have somebody agree with the motion there? Thank you, Councillor Todd, and seconder, Councillor Bellstar. And discussion.
That seems like a smoking deal to me. Really does. I mean, 140 for 2 brand new trucks, plus the tax. And they're hybrids just because that's what's available.
The goal with these two replacements was to do either hybrid or fully electric. Yeah.
Sorry, we had the two electric ones, or the new electric one. I was just wondering, are they happy with that? Did they decide to go hybrid instead of fully electric because they're not available, or is it just, that's the luck of the draw?
We've got one hybrid and one full electric, and we've been putting those through the paces for the last year and a half, I guess. Charging infrastructure is still one of the challenges for the full electric. Our panel over at the shop doesn't have a lot of room left in it, so it would require substantial upgrades. The one vehicle is used by water wastewater and a lot more of a range up to Silver Star Lakes and out to Thomas Hayes on a regular basis. And then the other pickup is utilized for on-call and a larger range for that one as well. So that's why we opted for the hybrids for those two pickups. And one of the criteria we have is for a 6.5-foot box, which is surprisingly hard to come by nowadays. Everything seems to be 5'5". Just having enough room for water keys to be carried in the back and the necessary tools negates the preference for that hybrid in the 6.5 box.
Is it stage 2 your chargers at the hall at City Works?
Yes. Yeah.
You can charge at my house. If you know, I mean, if it comes down to it and it's a real hassle.
Yeah.
For this term anyway.
Just to confirm that the trucks were sort of our new color scheme for the city is with that gray, and the trucks are also 4-door quad cabs, etc.
Yeah, the trucks are 4-door super cab. They will be in white. Finding those models available in the Arctic gray avalanche gray has been a challenge. Half of our fleet is white, and so it does fit within the theme.
And then my only other question is, I know that you've been working on sourcing these, and last year when we purchased our new vehicles, or 16 months or so ago, that we did go through a dealership in Salmon Arm, and I just want to ensure that all dealerships in our neighborhood have the ability to bid on that process. I don't want to show that we have any favoritism.
The purchasing policy of the city does provide a provision for sole sourcing when the situation arises. So at this point, there is a dealer that we have been working with who is trying to find 2 units. Thought they had 2 units available, but apparently those sold already. So they're looking for 2 more.
All right, there's no further questions. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And next under correspondence, the letter from the Spalancine Chamber of Commerce regarding their termination lease, mid-February. I hope everything's transitioning well for the chamber. And then the Silga Community Excellent Awards nominations and call for resolutions has been forwarded to everybody. Under new business, Committee of the Whole, the November 28, 2024 carry review resolutions for council review and approval. So there is a motion with that. And that is that the 3-dimensional renderings and the overview plans for Pleasant Valley Road, both sections, Pleasant Valley Road South and the downtown park, be endorsed. And that the, sorry, just that one. Okay, sorry, there's that one. So we'll move her on that one. Councillor Draplo, thank you. And Councillor Todd, was that a yes? Thank you. Councillor Todd, questions? Councillor Wayner?
Yeah, seeing Pleasant Valley Road, both sections, I just believe that incorporates the general stores area as well, correct? I'm just curious, I didn't hear a solution or what might be brought forward in the dimensional drawings as far as safety for cyclists, as far as the parking. Will that be incorporated into the drawings when we brought up the discussion? Does that ring a bell or? So there's the,
So I think that we would be looking at that at the design portion, whereas this is just the conceptual portion. So we haven't worked on it any further than what you saw at committee of the whole.
Okay.
But when we get to the designing of the drawings, then we'll be able to address kind of more the specific detail concerns. You were thinking about parking along the multi-use path, right?
correct, and just how the
Yeah.
doorways would implement. I just wasn't sure if that could be incorporated into a drawing. Because when I look at it, it looks like a concern, so.
So when, after the committee of the whole, council supported the concept plans, we set them aside at that point. And we'll, until we get into the actual design, then we would be looking at modifying it at that time.
Okay, just here where I'll be critical of that when I'm looking at it, so.
Any further questions? Seeing none, then I will call the vote on that motion. All those in favor? That will be carried unanimously. And the second one is that the following be approved, the City of Armstrong Revitalization Initiative. A, the multi-use path to the east of Mill Street be set as phase 2 of the project. B, that the multi-use path along Pleasant Valley Boulevard South be phase 3. C, the timing of the downtown park and Pleasant Valley Road west of Okanagan be brought forward once progress has been made on advancing the first 3 phases. We have a mover for that. Councillor Todd, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Drapula, thank you. And questions? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And the Armstrong Spalmachine Trail Society, Councillor Drapula has been appointed and volunteered as the council representative to the Armstrong Spalmachine Trail Society, and that Councillor Wayner be appointed as the alternate. Do we have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Seconder, got to get from this side of the room because those two are involved. Councillor Wayner, second. Thank you, sir. I'm assuming there's no questions. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And at this point, unless there's further comments?
We didn't discuss the Community Excellence Awards at all. Is there any conversation we could have or throw out some ideas or suggestions for them, or have you received some already, or?
I have not. I thought that this, after reading these, that if we had some ideas that we would move those through our acting CAO. But if there's something specific you'd like to comment on?
Well, I don't know that I do, but I thought, I mean, we should be having a discussion on it at least, I believe.
Please feel free to discuss what you like.
I don't think it qualifies for this year, but potentially after the pond on Okanagan is done, environmental sustainability could be something for this year for nominations for the next turnaround.
Well, and I kind of agree, because I think there's, you know, some really big things coming up that will be huge qualifiers, like our downtown revite and the rail trail coming to town. But I think at some point we missed out because we didn't talk about it, where we could have applied for our new office building being done. So I just felt that it
Councillor?
was worth having a conversation about getting some opportunities for people to talk about putting something forward
We did apply last year and you won.
for our office.
I think it was for the office, wasn't it for the office?
I think it was environmental sustainability, incling the
Well,
office.
that was
and
all our chargers and our equipment
landscaping
changing and all that kind of stuff.
the
yeah.
efficiency of the building, and
Yeah.
it was all included.
There were up until 2019 or 20, there was a Wood BC award for buildings that were built mainly of wood. And that would have been a great one. And I believe I brought it up with Dawn, but BC, is it Wood? BC Wood, whatever that group, Wood First. They didn't have the award, so I don't know if they brought that back, but that's the one I was thinking about that we missed out on. So yeah, I know we did the environmental sustainability and we continue to do that. And the economic development one will be coming up, and we'll have some really good things to talk about there. Social responsibility, what exactly would that be even?
It could be some of the stuff we did around heat dome planning, for example, like if you're considering some things that are on that category, that would be social responsibility. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the.
Well, that being said, that if any good ideas come up, I'll certainly move forward with those. Anybody have anything else they'd like to add to our meeting tonight? Hearing none, then I will call for a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, everybody.